Well, if you think about it, Bitcoin serves as two kinds of hedges. One is a hedge against inflation and outright confiscation of wealth. The other is against counterparty risk.
비트코인은 인플레이션에 대한 피난처이자 거래 상대방 리스크에 대한 피난처라고 주장하고 있는 이 인물은 돈나무언니로 알려져 있는 아크인베스트의 CEO 캐시우드입니다. 현재 크립토 시장에는 비트코인 현물 ETF 승인에 대한 화두가 가장 뜨거운 감자로 떠오르고 있는데요. 아크 인베스트먼트도 SEC의 비트코인 현물 ETF 출시 승인을 기다리고 있는 만큼 CEO인 캐시우드가 생각하는 향후 가상자산 시장의 전반적인 인사이트와 비트코인 현물 ETF의 방향성에 대한 그녀의 디테일한 의견에 대해서 함께 들어보도록 하겠습니다.
You know, you are also involved in you've got your own filing for physically backed Bitcoin ETF. Do you think that the excitement there has driven up prices across crypto? I mean, today is a down day, but we're still looking at $29,000 for Bitcoin.
Yes, I do think that in June, when BlackRock announced its filing, or when it was announced that BlackRock had filed for Bitcoin ETF, the Bitcoin price did shoot up, but has been fairly stable since then. So I do think it's had an impact. A bigger impact this year was the regional bank crisis. It was very interesting to watch Bitcoin go from 19,000 to 30,000 right in the middle of that banking crisis as regional banks were going bankrupt. So it was a flight to safety. So I thought that move was just as interesting.
Hang on, a flight to safety? Is buying Bitcoin somehow a flight to safety? Isn't it a little too volatile for that?
Well, if you think about it, Bitcoin serves as two kinds of hedges. One is a hedge against inflation and outright confiscation of wealth. The other is against counterparty risk. And when the regional banks started going down, this fear sort of, memory, the counterparty risk became real. And so there was this flight into Bitcoin, a completely decentralized, transparent network, which is not subject to counterparty risk.
Kathy, so you are in this race. Let's talk about the race a little bit. The first important deadline coming up is August 13th, where the ARC filing, the SEC is either going to delay it, which we think they'll probably delay it, and then BlackRock is later. You filed before BlackRock, but BlackRock came in with the surveillance sharing agreement with Coinbase. That was novel, right? Now we're looking in the future, there's talk of a common clock where the SEC could approve a bunch of ETFs at once, putting you on a level playing field with BlackRock and others. What's your take on how this will play out, given you filed earlier?
I think you're probably right that August 13th will come and go, and I think the SEC, if it's going to approve a Bitcoin ETF, will approve more than one at once. So then, again, because most of these essentially will be the same, and it will come down to marketing, communicating the message. We've been putting out our Bitcoin monthly for the last. We are now starting a Bitcoin brainstorming session. Our first one we launched last Thursday. So we're trying to get the word out there that our research is deep, and we've been doing it since 2015 when we gained our first exposure to GBTC. We were the first public asset manager to gain exposure to Bitcoin at all in 2015.
Right now, I see GBTC as the third largest holding. If we are in a situation where the SEC does give its blessing for a spot Bitcoin ETF, would you plan to sell out of GBTC and buy one of these physically backed funds?
I cannot talk about what we would and would not do. And in fact, our compliance team is giving us marching orders not to talk very much about this filing and its aftermath at all. So just the fact that we filed with our partner 21 shares is as far as I can go.
Fair enough. No, I was expecting something along those lines. I am curious to get your take on the regulatory temperature right now, because in addition to this rush of spot Bitcoin ETF filings that we've seen, there's also been sort of a race that's unfolding for an Ether futures ETF. There's been a ton of filings to that effect, and not specific to those funds, but do you sense that the mood music around the SEC and what their appetite to allow these products to launch has changed in the last several months?
Well, I think that the two other branches of government, the judicial branch and the legislative branch, are giving the SEC pause because the SEC is losing cases in court having to do with its regulations around crypto. That's the first thing. And there are bills that are making their way through the House and are seeing some bipartisan support. So I do believe that Gary Gensler, I guess last week or 10 days ago, said something like, well, you know, I'm not the only one who makes this decision. There are 5 commissioners. Now, of course, we know they're weighted towards the Democrats, 3 Democrats, 2 Republicans. And so one assumes that the way that Gary votes is the way the SEC will vote. But he seemed to be distancing himself a little bit, and so maybe we can take that as a bit of a clue.
We definitely did. We thought that was a good sign, but you know, we're reading all kinds of tea leaves in this. Let me ask you about Coinbase, because you have increased your position in Coinbase. It's also who your surveillance sharing agreement is with also. How important is it that Coinbase is a bridge or compliant enough for the SEC in terms of working with traditional finance? Is your bullishness on this stock that they are going to be sort of the traditional finance bridge, or is it other, you think people are just going to continue trading crypto on Coinbase?
No, absolutely. Well, both. We think that it is the most regulatory compliant exchange out there. And we've been very pleased with how its derivatives exchange in Bermuda has ramped in here. It's very early days, but again, clearly a trusted partner. And we are also seeing that there's more turmoil out there. I think that's how you say the name of the exchange. And Tether and Binance, there are rumblings out there that not is all is well. And so Coinbase is going to be the flight to safety exchange, no doubt about it.
And do you think the surveillance agreements with Coinbase are going to be enough to deal with things like price manipulation in this market? I mean, that's been one of the main concerns from the SEC lawyers with whom we've spoken.
Well, what I find so interesting still, and this is why we believe that the SEC will lose the grayscale case. How can you approve a Bitcoin futures ETF and not a Bitcoin ETF? And in fact, if you're really thinking about consumer protection, a futures ETF is swap space. So there's counterparty risk there that you would not have with a Bitcoin ETF, which is backed 1-to-1 with Bitcoin in Coinbase's cold storage. It still confounds me.
And not to mention the point that Eric makes, which is that if there had been an ETF, a lot of people wouldn't have bought Bitcoin at FTX and instead would use that vehicle.